The United Nations Secretary General has confirmed that efforts are underway to see the truce between Israel and Hamas extended further, with the current two-day extension due to expire later today.
Antonio Guterres was addressing a high-level ministerial meeting of the Security Council focused on the Palestinian question and chaired by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang.
The Council is also expected to hear from the Foreign Minister of several Arab and Islamic states, including key mediators to the conflict, Qatar and Egypt, in addition to Jordan, Saudi Arabia and Turkey.
The meeting was also addressed by Foreign Minister of Palestine and the Israeli ambassador to the UN.
The people of Gaza are in the midst of an epic humanitarian catastrophe before the eyes of the world. We must not look away. Intense negotiations are taking place to prolong the truce, which we strongly welcome. But we believe we need a true humanitarian ceasefire. And we must ensure the people of the region finally have a horizon of hope by moving in a determined and irreversible way towards establishing a two-state solution on the basis of United Nations resolutions and international law, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. Failure will condemn the Palestinians, Israelis, the region and the world to a never-ending cycle of death and destruction.
We thank Qatar and Egypt for their efforts that led to a truce. But a truce must become a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire. The massacres cannot be allowed to resume. This is not a war. This is a carnage that nothing and no one can justify. It must be brought to an end. Mr. President, we had said early on that the humanitarian catastrophe cannot be prevented. People held captive cannot be released. Regional escalation cannot be avoided without a stop to the Israeli assault against the Palestinian people in Gaza. What we see now confirms what we have said then. Thousands of lives could have been spared. The momentum we are finally witnessing now must be sustained.
How would you react if a terror organization massacred thousands of your citizens, abducted hundreds of them, and the Security Council refused to condemn the terrorists? Hamas has publicly stated, you all saw it, that it will repeat October 7 over and over again until Israel is no more. How would you respond and defend your citizens from such a clear threat? With a ceasefire? How can one call for a ceasefire and at the same time claim to seek a solution to the conflict? After all, anyone who supports a ceasefire basically supports Hamas' continued reign of terror in Gaza. Hamas is a genocidal terror organization. They don't hide it. Not a reliable partner for peace. Don't you see the contradiction here? Calling for both a ceasefire and peace is a paradox.
First, we should work for a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire with the greatest urgency. There's no safe area under gunfire, and letting the fighting drag on would only bring more death and damage. There is no firewall in Gaza either. And resumed fighting would only most likely turn into a calamity that devours the whole region. What happened between Palestine and Israel over the decades show, time and again, that resorting to military means is definitely not a way out, and addressing violence with violence will only exacerbate hatred and confrontation and lead to a ceaseless, vicious cycle. China strongly hopes that the past days of pause will not be a hiatus before a new round of offensive, but rather the beginning of further diplomatic efforts for a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire.
Well, for more now on this council meeting, which is still underway, we speak to correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us from the UN headquarters in New York. Sherwin, good evening. Some of the key mediators are all in that council meeting. What's your reading on whether we get another extension to what was Initially a 4-day pause, then a 6-day pause. How do we get to 8 and beyond?
Yeah, it's beginning to feel, Iman, like sort of a high-stakes auction at Christie's or Sotheby's, right? But the imperatives are around life and death, so far more serious than what might play itself out in an auction house. And look, the key word here is hostages. There are still about 160 hostages, about 100 of those civilian, and that is the leverage that Hamas possesses here in terms of whether this truce will be extended further. Israel has made it clear that they will continue to suspend their bombardment and military actions in Gaza as long as hostages are released. And the initial truce framework allows for an extension by 1 day if an additional 10 hostages are released. So that's the big ask, right, in terms of where we go from here. You correctly point out that key mediators are in the Security Council right now, including the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Qatar, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, and other Saudi Foreign Minister, Jordan's Foreign Minister, and other Muslim and Arab countries. And so the big ask, certainly from their perspective, the Secretary General, is for a permanent ceasefire here. Given the humanitarian imperatives, this is about life and death. This is about clearing infrastructure. This is about reaching the north in terms of, a region in Gaza that has been even more starved than the rest of Gaza. So the imperatives here are clear. It's going to depend on what the Qataris are going to say in the Security Council, which we are moments away from hearing, in terms of, giving us a path in terms of where we go from here, Iman.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to share developments as soon as they come to hand, Sherwin, particularly if they are likely to be imminent. We're showing and projecting to our viewers a live picture from inside that meeting. Sherwin, there's also growing talk about what the future looks like beyond this conflict, this much-vaunted two-state solution that has increasingly become a pipe dream in this current context. What are you hearing?
Yeah, there is a lot of talk about what comes after this conflict, but it's important, I think, to point out to our viewers, Iman, that we are very far away from a place where the two parties are going to sit around a negotiating table. There are far greater imperatives in terms of life and death, in terms of access to sanitation, access to healthcare, access to the basic infrastructure, the essentials of water and food that are driving where we go to from here in the short term. But it is something that is being spoken about more and more. What happens if, for example, Israel successfully eliminates Hamas? What does that look like? Is there a greater role for the Palestinian Authority in terms of governing Gaza, which they do not do right now? They only govern in the West Bank. And this was also something that was addressed by the Secretary General's Special Coordinator for Middle East Peace, Tor Vennesland, who also addressed the Security Council earlier. This, Iman, is what he had to say.
The dizzying pace of events and staggering needs on the ground make it difficult to see beyond the most immediate challenges. Nevertheless, we must begin work on what comes next. Without an effective political and security framework for when the fighting ceases, it will be impossible to sustainably end the violence and shape a new reality. Over the coming weeks and months, the international community must increase their engagement with Israel, the PA and regional partners on constructive and practical political solutions.
So very much a vision statement, if you will, Iman, from Tor Vennesland in terms of where we go once the guns cease to fire. But I will also point out what the Israeli ambassador Gilad Erdan said in this meeting. Let me quote him. The only way to dramatically improve the situation is to support Israel's mission to eradicate Hamas's terror capabilities. I reiterate again, the war can end tomorrow, even today, if Hamas returns all hostages and turns in all terrorists who took part in the massacre, of course, referring to the massacre on October 7th in Israel. So the Israelis are clear. In the short term, this is a military operation that will resume when all is said and done in terms of the current exchanges you're seeing in terms of Palestinian prisoners and the hostages that are still being held by Hamas.
And they've been resolute in that position. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, thank you. We'll wait to hear developments out of that meeting, and we'll bring them to you, our viewers, as soon as they come to hand. Sherwin Bryce-Pease is in the US at the UN headquarters. He is our US correspondent.